Okay, so these are the three main acts: the Wildlife Protection Act, Indian Forest Act, and the Forest Rights Act of 2006 that will help me answer this question. The most important one, of course, is the Indian Forest Act, which explicitly defines the forest produce, and I have that with me. So, according to the Indian Forest Act, first of all, this act was enacted in 1927, but then it has been amended in 2019. Now, according to this act, there are two types of forest producers. One is universal forest produce or universal FP, and one is only in situ FP. Universal FP means no matter where it is, whether it's in a forest region, whether it's in your backyard, in your bedroom, bathroom, it is a forest produce. And only in situ FPs means that only if it is within a forest area will it be a forest produce. So within only in situ FPs you have things like leaves and flowers and fruits. I mean, if you have a mango fruit growing in your backyard, you can take out that fruit, you can even sell it. But if you are taking it from a forest area, then it is in situ FP. In other words, if you are taking it from a forest area, then it is a FP. If you are taking it from a non-forest private area, it is not an FP. What are the other items in this category? Plants not being trees, such as grass and shrubs. So these things outside forest area do not qualify as FPs. Then peat, humus, fallen leaves, some minerals, sand, rock, coal, major and minor minerals. These are only in situ FPs. In other words, if I have a fallen leaf inside a forest area, that is an FP. But if I have a fallen leaf outside a forest area, that is not an FP. I can do anything with it. This is very important. What are the universal FPs? First is timber. Now, timber means felled tree. That means if you cut a tree and you use the wood for timbering purpose, that is timber. No matter where that tree is, you might grow that tree in your terrace, in your backyard, but if you are cutting it, it is timber and it is an FP, and you have to take the permission of the forest department. And two trees, sandalwood and red sanders, their wood has been clearly separately mentioned because they are very important trees and also sensitive to a lot of poaching and smuggling activities. So any kind of timber is a universal FP no matter where it is. It might be in your dining room, but you have to take the permission of the forest department. And because forest is a concurrent subject, the Indian Forest Act is a central act, but the state governments, almost all of them, have their own acts and rules. So in the case of sandalwood, I know that you have to call the forest department people and they will cut it for you and they will give you some money, which is usually there are some complaints that it is not very remunerative. So there has been a lot of debate in this regard, but I don't know how to pronounce this. Caoutchouc, this means rubber, and catechu is also an extract, wood oil, gum. So if you have a tree, you can take out the leaves and flowers, no problem. But if you take out the wood oil, if you take out the resin, then in that case it is an FP, and you'll have to take the permission of the forest department. Then there is one particular leaf called tendu leaf, which is a universal FP. In other words, usually leaves you can have anywhere, but tendu leaves, even if you grow it in your own home, it is an FP. Wow. Then there is one category of flowers, the mahua flowers. Usually flowers are only in situ FPs. In other words, if they are within the forest area, well and good, they are FPs. But outside, they are not FPs. But mahua flowers, everywhere in India, it is an FP. So this is very important to note. Now, I want to understand the difference between these two acts. I mean, what did the 2019 amendment really bring? And there was a lot of news. First of all, you see that there are no tendu leaves here. Tendu leaves have been added in the new act. In other words, earlier you could have exploited and harvested tendu leaves in your private land and no forest department clearance was required, but now it is, because it has become a universal FP. Second difference is that although it has not been mentioned in this act, timber. You see timber? It included bamboo. Although bamboo is taxonomically a grass, but it included bamboo, and a lot of people, especially in Northeast India, whose livelihood depended on a number of uses of bamboo, they were kind of discouraged from growing bamboo. So this 2019 Act has taken bamboo out of this definition, and therefore bamboo is no longer a universal FP. However, you see, including grass, bamboo, in the new Act as well, bamboo has been made an only in-situ FP. In other words, if you have bamboo in a forest area, of course it's an FP, but outside forest area you can do anything, it's not an FP. Okay, the third difference is, just see, wild animals and skins, then silk cocoons, honey, wax, this portion is deleted. So this wildlife products were only in-situ FPs. In other words, outside the forest area they were not FPs. They were under the influence of the Wildlife Protection Act and the Chief Wildlife Warden, of course, but they were not FPs. But now it has been deleted, and in the universal FP it has been mentioned that wildlife as defined under the Wildlife Protection Act. And the Wildlife Protection Act defines wildlife as any animal or aquatic or land vegetation which is in its habitat. Habitat is defined as its natural place where it is growing in the wild. In other words, any plant or animal in the wild is wildlife. And so any product of such an animal or that animal itself is a universal FP. Okay, it is a universal FP. So technically speaking, even if you have a fish in your aquarium, it is a universal FP and you cannot exploit it, because fish let me see, this is what makes this video good, because I am unrehearsed. I have made a mistake. If fish is in the aquarium, it is not in its natural habitat, right? If mango is grown in my backyard, it is not the natural habitat. Okay, if I am having a dog as my pet, it is not the natural habitat. If I am having livestock, it is not its natural habitat. So if it is not its natural habitat, it is not wildlife. If it is not wildlife, it is not a universal FP. And if it is not a universal FP and it's not an only in-situ FP as well, there is no rule on that. Even in the Wildlife Protection Act, livestock have not been mentioned in Schedules 1 to 6. Fish, most of the fishes have not been mentioned in Schedules 1 to 6. I have seen a few sharks mentioned, seahorses mentioned, corals are mentioned, but see the golden-backed mahasir, the critically endangered fish species found in Kaveri River, that has not been mentioned. The minnows are important endangered fish, that is not mentioned. So usually I have seen that fishes are missing, a good deal of plants and trees are missing. I haven't seen sandalwood, I haven't seen red sanders in the Wildlife Protection Act. The focus of the Wildlife Protection Act I have seen is more on animals, although it is mentioning that it's for flora and fauna, but it is more on animals. And so that is important. Earlier what was there, that these things were mentioned in only in-situ FPs, and outside the forest area it was under the purview of the wildlife department. But now the entire thing is universal FP, so it is both the influence of wildlife as well as the forest department only if that animal or plant is in its natural habitat. And you might say, I can have a tiger as my pet. Tiger is not in its natural habitat when it is in my home. Okay, the Indian Forest Act will say you nothing, but the Wildlife Protection Act will sue you, because you are not allowed to have animals which are in Schedules 1 to 6. Of course, Schedule 5 is for vermin which can be killed. Schedule 6 is for plants which cannot be cultivated without proper permission. Schedule 1 to 4 are protected animals. So IFA, the Indian Forest Act, will do nothing, but the WPA, the Wildlife Protection Act, will sue you, and there are heavy penalties. Let me tell you one thing, Schedules 1 and 2 are having very strict penalties. Schedules 3 and 4 are relatively less endangered, and therefore they have lesser penalty, although they also have penalty. Okay, another difference that this new amendment has made is that as you can see, universal and only in situ was there, but timber and non-timber forest produce have been divided. This Indian Forest Act 1947 defines non-timber forest produce as anything apart from timber. So you see that within forest produce you have this timber. Everything apart from timber is non-timber forest produce. Why is it important? Because in the Forest Rights Act, by the way, before I go to the Forest Rights Act, let me also mention, right after this, if you see the Bear Act, it has been mentioned that agricultural produce, what we see in the farms, the paddy, wheat, pulses, they are also not forest produce. Okay, so no restrictions on that from the Forest Department. Now I go to the Forest Rights Act, and why this non-timber forest produce defined in the amended act is important, because the Forest Rights Act says that this non-timber forest produce is minor forest produce, MFP. Why is this minor forest produce important? Because the forest dwellers have usage rights of these minor forest produce. Now what do you mean by usage rights? So minor forest produce, the usage rights. So usage right, probably a lot of these tribals and forest dwellers, they depend on these minor forest producers apart from timber for their daily livelihood, and also for they might be selling it on a small scale. So that right is preserved by this act. This is MFP. And who gets this right? The forest dwellers. Now who are the forest dwellers? As per this act, forest dwellers are either STs or other forest dwellers, who might be SCs, OBCs, general category. If they are STs, in order to get this right, they will have to be continuously living since 2006, which is the date of enactment of this act. And for OFDs, it is this condition, plus they must be living 75 years prior to 2006, 75 years or 3 generations prior to 2006, plus they must be living continuously since 2006. If that is so, they might be any caste, they might be general caste, SCS or OBC, they will be qualified as forest dwellers, and they will get the MFP usage rights. Plus all of these forest dwellers also get land ownership rights up to 4 hectares. So it might be 1 hectare, 2 hectare, 3 hectare or 4 hectare. That extent is determined by the Gram Sabha. Gram Sabha consists of all the adult, that is the voters, electors in a Gram Panchayat region. So they will define the extent of the rights which these forest dwellers will be getting. And this MFP is important because now bamboo is also an MFP, because bamboo was earlier timber. So this Forest Rights Act of 2006 says that MFP is equal to non-timber forest produce, and for the first time it has defined MFP clearly. But non-timber forest produce wasn't defined that clearly. That has been defined under the Indian Forest Act amended, non-timber forest produce. Fair enough, I have discussed most of the things. I've discussed about what is a forest produce, why is the Knowledge of Wildlife Protection Act important, and why is the importance of the Forest Rights Act important. One more thing I would like to discuss and wind off is, so first of all, the differences between the 2019 amendment and the old act. First of all, that tendu leaves was added. Tendu leaves. Second thing is that second thing, what did I discuss? That bamboo was removed from a timber. Third thing is that this wildlife thing has been changed. And fourth thing is that non-timber forest produce has been defined. These are the changes in the 2019 amendment. Another thing which happened in the 2019 amendment, nothing more of importance. In the FRA 2006, a term has been defined, critical wildlife habitat. So you might give land ownership and everything, but if a certain area is a critical wildlife habitat, it must not be inviolated. In other words, if human presence is there in that area, it is not good for the wildlife. So habitat rights will not be given. And Baiga is a particularly vulnerable tribal group. There are 4 preconditions for PVTGs, and I think there are about 75 PVTGs in India. This Baiga is the first tribe, and it inhabits central India. It is the first tribe to get the habitat rights, which has been acknowledged, I think, by the union government or the state governments. So this critical wildlife habitat is an important concept. Most of the things I have already discussed. I think I should now wind up. See you all in the next video, and until then, stay tuned.